Chapter 9. The question of monopoly. The question of the state's monopoly and the opposing efforts of the interlopers to break this monopoly resolves itself into a consideration of the way in which private letters were carried, for the public letters were entirely at the disposal of the state to be dealt with as it saw fit. From the 16th century, there were several ways in which private letters might be conveyed. Within the kingdom, they might be sent by the common carriers, friends, special messengers, or the royal posts. Letters sent abroad were carried by the royal posts, the merchant adventurers' posts, the strangers' posts, and the merchants' posts while they lasted. The fact that private letters were conveyed by the royal posts is generally expressed in rather indefinite terms or by references to proclamations, but that they were actually so conveyed is entirely beyond doubt. In 1585, a certain Mr. Lukenner informed Walsingham that the post just landed had brought many letters directed to merchants, besides those for the court and government. He asked whether he might open those letters which were directed to suspected merchants. This reference is of course to letters coming from abroad. The same holds true of inland letters, for in 1583 Randolph, the Postmaster General, wrote to Walsingham enclosing the names of those who charged the posts with their private letters and commissions at a penny the mile. G. Roberts' Social History of the Southern Counties of England, 1856, p. 508, Joyce, p. 4. Cal. SPD, 1581-90, p. 131. Cal. SPD, 1581-90, p. 228, 1598-1601, p. 427, Rep. Com. 1844, Roman 14, 601, p. 4. In 1591, the first proclamation affirming the government monopoly in the foreign posts was issued. All persons except the Postmaster General and his deputies were forbidden, directly or indirectly, to gather up, receive, bring in or carry out of this realm any letters or packets, the only exceptions being in the case of the dispatches of the principal secretaries of state, of ambassadors, and others sufficiently authorized. An appendix to the same proclamation commanded all mayors, bailiffs, sheriffs, justices, etc., and especially all searchers to be on the watch for men coming into or going out of the realm with packets or letters. In this last part of the proclamation, we can see why it was thought necessary to restrict the carriage of letters to and from foreign countries to the royal posts. It was done that the government might be able to discover any treasonable or seditious correspondence. This did not always remain the object of the state in restricting competition, but was succeeded later by other and different motives. In order that there might be no doubt about the whole question, the Postmaster General received word from the Council to inform the London merchants, foreigners as well as British subjects, and all others whom it might concern, that they should no longer employ any others to carry their letters than those legally appointed in accordance with the terms of the proclamation. Rep. Com. 1844, Roman 14, 601, p. 4, App. p. 36, 14. In 1602, the first order concerning the dispatch of private letters within the kingdom was issued to the royal posts. The posts for the Queen's immediate service were allowed to carry only state dispatches, directed by members of the Council, the Postmaster General, and certain officials. Such dispatches, when sent by the regular posts, were to be forwarded immediately. The letters of all other persons allowed to write by post must wait for the regular departure of the postman. In the orders to the posts issued in 1609, the first article reads as follows: "No packets or letters shall be sent by the posts or bind any post to ride therewith, but those on our special affairs." The first part of this is certainly strong, but it is modified by the succeeding clause, "nor bind any post to ride therewith." Evidently, he might if he wished, and he would probably hesitate longer over a state packet, for the conveyance of which he was never assured of anything than over a private letter, for which he was certain of his pay. By posts for the Queen's immediate service was probably meant the special messengers attached to the court. Cal. SPD, 1547-65 pp. 215-77, Rep. Com. 1844, Roman 14, 601, App. p. 42, 20. It was the custom after 1609 to follow the appointment of every new Postmaster General, with a proclamation assigning him and his deputies the sole privilege of carrying all letters and reading anathema upon all interlopers. Thus King James favored Stanhope, his postmaster general, with a grant of monopoly. On De Quester's appointment as foreign postmaster general, a proclamation was issued, forbidding any but his agents from having anything to do with foreign letters. In spite of the improvements which he inaugurated, we find him asking the king a few years later to renew his patent of monopoly, and his request was granted. He was evidently suffering from competition. But the merchant adventurers' posts were not yet dead, and their postmaster, Billingsley, abetted by the House of Commons, gave De Quester so much trouble that he was imprisoned by the council's order. Letters carried by a friend or special messenger, or a common carrier, were accepted. Rep. Com. 1844 Roman 14 601, App. p. 42 20. Ibid. 1591-94, p. 401. Ibid. 1627-18, pp. 511-22. The House had already shown its interest in postal affairs by summoning postmasters before the Committee of Grievances in 1624, Joe H. C. 1540-1628, pp. 680-9774. Cal. SPD. 1628-29, p. 177. In the meantime, the postmen on the London-Plymouth road had petitioned the council that they alone should carry the letters and dispatches of the merchants over their road. They said they had so improved the service between London and Plymouth that letters were now dispatched between the two cities in 3 days, and an answer might be received within 1 week from the time of first writing. Their complaint was against a certain Samuel Jude, who had undertaken the conveyance of the London merchants' letters. Jude himself acknowledged this, but said that he had never meddled with the through post, by which he meant the traveler's post. Ibid. 1625-49, p. 367, 1629-31, p. 200. So long as the royal posts did not give satisfaction, competition was inevitable. Under Witherings they had improved so much that what competition there was received no support from the London merchants. In 1633 they addressed a petition to the king, praying that he would protect Witherings from some strangers in London who had set up posts of their own. They pointed out how he, acting with some foreign postmasters, had set up packet posts, traveling day and night. By means of these, letters were conveyed between London and Antwerp in 3 days, while the messengers needed from 8 to 14 days to travel the same distance. The common carriers were giving trouble in the dispatch of inland letters at the same time that competition in the foreign posts was attracting attention. It was their custom to send their carts on ahead while they lingered to collect letters. After the collection, they hastened on, leaving their carts behind, and delivered the letters on the way. It was provided that no carrier should stay longer than 8 hours in a place after his cart had left it, or arrive in any place 8 hours ahead of it. As long as their speed was governed by that of their lumbering carts over the wretched roads, no fear was felt that their competition would prove troublesome. Cal. SPD. 1633-34, p. 39. Ibid. 1637-38, pp. 22, 171, 177, 183. Ibid. 1637-38, p. 193. Rep. Com. 1844 Roman 14 601, App. p. 58-37. With the growing strength of Parliament, more and more opposition was made to the grants of monopoly and their enforcement. In 1642, the House of Commons passed a resolution affirming that the taking of the letters from the several carriers and the several restraints and imprisonments of Grover, Chapman, Cotton, and Mackerel are against the law. The House proceeded to state that these several persons should have reparation and damages from Coke, Windibank, and Witherings. 4 years later, a report was made by Justices Pheasant and Rolls on Witherings' patent. They held that the clause of restraint in the grant to Witherings was void. This decision was quite in accordance with the views of Parliament when they opposed the king and all his works. But after Parliament had obtained control of the posts, the President and governors of the poor of the City of London proposed to the Common Council that the city should establish a postal system in order to raise money for the relief of the poor in London. A committee was appointed to inform Warwick, Prydox, and Witherings of their intention. At the same time, an attempt to lay a petition before Parliament on the question failed. Council's advice was sought and obtained in favor of the undertaking, and in 1650 the committee received orders to settle the stages. At the end of 6 weeks, they had established postal communications with Scotland and other places. Complaint was made to Parliament, and the Commons passed a resolution that the office of postmaster, inland and foreign, is and ought to be in the sole power and disposal of the Parliament. The same year the city posts were suppressed. Joe H.C., 1640-42, p. 722. These were the same judges who had decided in favor of Stanhope's patent in Stanhope v. Witherings. Rep. Com. 1844 Roman 14 601, App. p. 67-42. Chas. Knight London, 1842 Roman 3, p. 276. R. Sharp, London and the Kingdom, 1894 pp. 322-23. Oxenbridge and his friends who had set up posts of their own gave Prydox and Manley the hardest fight that any postmaster general ever had to encounter from interlopers. Joyce says that Oxenbridge had acted as Prydox's deputy. If this is so, he was soon up in arms against his superior. In accordance with the judicial decision that the clause in Withering's patent giving him a monopoly of the carriage of letters was void, Oxenbridge, Blackwall, Thompson, and Mallon had undertaken the private conveyance of letters and had set up posts of their own. Prydox had charged 6d for each letter and had organized weekly posts from and to London. Oxenbridge charged only 3d, and his posts went from and to London 3 times a week. Prydox then did the same and set up posters announcing that the interlopers' posts would be stopped. His agents assaulted Oxenbridge's servants and killed one of them. He also stopped his rivals' mails on Sundays, but allowed his own to proceed as on other days. In addition to his regular tri-weekly mails, Oxenbridge provided packet boats for Ireland and intended to settle stages between London and Yarmouth and the other places named by the Council of State. To proceed in Oxenbridge's own words, suddenly contracts were called for. We offered £9,100 a year through Ben Andrews, £800 more than was offered by Manley. Yet Colonel Rich allowed Manley to take advantage of an offer made by Kendall then absent and not privy to it for £10,000 a year. Consideration had been offered by counsel, but Manley had broken into our offices, taken letters, and had forbidden us from having anything to do with the post. An order of the Council of State, bearing the same date as the grant to Manley, was sent to Oxenbridge and his friends, informing them that Manley had been given the sole right to the inland and foreign letter offices. This did not end the controversy, for 6 months later, we find Oxenbridge and Thompson complaining that a monopoly in carrying letters had been given to Manley. They claimed that all who wished should be allowed to carry letters at the ordinary rates. Joyce p. 29. Cal. SPD, 1653-54 pp. 22-24, 372 cp. 33 note. Cal. SPD, 1652-53, p. 456. Ibid, 1653-54, p. 372. Of all the interlopers up to the middle of the 17th century, Oxenbridge had proved himself by far the ablest. From the point of view of the legal decision of 1646 and the position of Parliament before 1640, his position was unassailable. With the present policy of the Post Office in view, his actions will probably be condemned by the majority. But in 1650 conditions were entirely different. Before 1635, the state had either tacitly allowed the carriage of private letters to the profit of the postman, or had officially taken over such carriage. But in this case, it was largely for the purpose of keeping in touch with the plots of the times. For 200 years after 1635, the idea was to make money from the conveyance of private letters. The effects of Oxenbridge's efforts were certainly beneficial if we are to believe his own story. Prydox had been forced to cut his rates in half in order to meet competition. The credit for this must lie with the interloper rather than with the monopolist. At the same time that Oxenbridge was giving so much trouble, letters were being carried by private hands in Bury, Dover, and Norwich. The offenders were summoned before the council for contempt and severely reprimanded. Petitions came from Thetford and Norwich, complaining that their messenger had been summoned to present himself before the council within 24 hours and had to travel 100 miles within that time, an impossibility in the opinion of the petitioners. As late as 1635, Prydox, the Attorney General, gave his opinion that Parliament's monopolistic resolution of that year affected only the office of Postmaster General and not the carrying of letters. Perhaps this was only a bit of spite on his part after Manly had succeeded to his old position. Ibid. 1653-54, p. 177. Ibid. 1653-54, p. 25. Ibid. 1652-53, pp. 109-110. The usual monopolistic powers, hitherto granted by proclamation, were embodied in the First Act of Parliament, establishing the postal system for England, Ireland, and Scotland in 1657. The Postmaster General was given the sole power to take up, carry, and convey all letters and packets from and to all parts of the Commonwealth, and to any place beyond the seas where he might establish posts. He alone was to employ foot posts, horse posts, and packet boats. Some exceptions were made to these general rules. Letters were allowed to be conveyed by carriers so long as they were carried in their carts or on their pack horses. The other exceptions were in the case of letters of advice sent by merchants in their ships and proceeding no farther than the ships themselves, and also in the case of a letter sent by a special messenger on the affairs of the sender, and in the case of a letter sent by a friend. Penalties were attached for disobedience to this part of the Act, 1/2 of the fine to go to the informer. The same provisions were enacted almost word for word in the Act of 1660, with the addition that letters might be carried by anyone between any place and the nearest post road for delivery to the postman. Scobel Collect, pt. Roman 2 pp. 511-13. 12 ch. Roman 2 c. 35. After the Restoration and for some months before the Act of 1660 was passed, Bishop had acted as farmer of the posts. In the absence of any law on the subject, the King's proclamation granting a monopoly to Bishop was freely disregarded. Competing posts to and from London sprang up, lessening the receipts which he would otherwise have obtained from the carriage of letters. It was calculated that during the 3 months before these interlopers could be suppressed, Bishop lost 500 through them, and orders were given to allow him an abatement in his rent to that amount. Cal. SPD, 1660-61, p. 475. In 1659, a book was published by John Hill, entitled A Penny Posta Vindication of the Liberty of Every Englishman in Carrying Merchants' and Other Men's Letters against any restraints of farmers of such employments. Notes and Queries, 6th Sir, Zi. p. 37. Rep. Com. 1844 Roman 14 601, App. p. 82, 57. In 1663, a certain Thomas Ibsen attempted to come to an agreement with the postmasters on the Holyhead Road. He wished to have the privilege of horsing travelers and made an offer to the postmasters to take charge of the post houses if they would allow him to proceed. He told them that they should make an attempt to have their salaries restored to their old value by Bishop, who had raised so much from them by fines and lowering their salaries. The Postmaster General told his deputies that if they dared to treat with the would-be interloper, he would dismiss them, and the whole thing fell through. At the same time, a warrant was issued by the council to mayors and other officials to search for and apprehend all persons carrying letters for hire, without license from the Postmaster General. Nevertheless, interloping did not cease, as is shown by the complaints from the postmasters. Cal. SPD, 1663-64 pp. 8-18. Ibid. 1663-64, p. 145. Ibid. 1663-64, p. 402. In the proclamation following the appointment of O'Neill as Postmaster General in 1663, it was ordered that no one should dare to detain or open a letter not addressed to himself unless under a warrant from one of the Secretaries of State. An exception was made in the case of letters carried by unauthorized persons. Such letters should be seized and sent to the Privy Council. In later proclamations, it was provided that they might be sent also to one of the Secretaries of State, in order that the persons sending or conveying them might be punished. Rep. Com. 1844 Roman 14 601, App. p. 88 61. After Lord Arlington's appointment as Postmaster General, he addressed a petition to the Duke of York complaining that carriers, proprietors of stage coaches, and others take upon themselves to collect letters to an incredible number, and on some stages double what the post brings. On account of this, he pointed out to His Royal Highness that a considerable part of his revenue was lost. This was quite true, since the post office had ceased to be farmed and the whole net revenue went to the Duke. This was followed the same year by a proclamation forbidding anyone to collect or carry letters without the authority of the Postmasters General. Carriers were forbidden to convey any letters which were not on matters relating to goods in their carts. Shipmasters must carry no letters beyond the first stage after their arrival in England, with the exception of the letters of merchants and owners. Searchers were appointed to see that the proclamation was enforced. It was even proposed to suppress all hackney coaches, the principal reason given being that they decreased the value of the Duke's monopoly by carrying multitudes of letters. Cal. SPD, 1668-69, p. 285. Cal. SPD, 1668-69, p. 376. Ibid, 1672-73, p. 64. It is a curious and interesting fact that for a short time, London had a halfpenny post, established in 1708 by a Mr. Povey in opposition to the regular penny post. The idea was much the same as that of Dockwra's, although Povey seems to have been a far more belligerent individual than his forerunner in the work. The Postmasters General tried to come to some compromise with him, but he would not listen to them. Finally, legal action was brought against him, based on the monopoly granted by the Act of 1660. Povey lost the suit, and his project fell through. His was the last attempt to organize a regular system of competing posts. During the remainder of the 18th century, improvements in postal communications disarmed much of the former opposition. Considerable damage was received from the superior speed with which letters might be sent by coaches, but after they were adopted by the post office, matters naturally adjusted themselves. Private vessels continued to convey letters which had not paid the rates prescribed in such cases by the Act of 1711, but this breach of the law was tolerated by the post office. Knight, London, 1842, Roman 3, p. 282, Joyce, pp. 120-123. Joyce, p. 329. Before the 19th century, opposition to the government monopoly had taken the form of competing systems of communication, started primarily for the sake of making money and at the same time vindicating the principle of competition. During the first 40 years of the 19th century, there was no opposition to the post office as a monopoly. The widespread dissatisfaction was due to the exorbitant rates of postage, and this dissatisfaction expressed itself in attempts to evade these rates, but, with the exception of individual messengers and carriers, there was no competing system of postal communication established. Opposition took the form of evasion of postage payments by legal and illegal means. The various exceptions to the government monopoly continued unchanged until still further modified in 1837. The additional modifications were in the case of commissions and returns, affidavits, writs and legal proceedings, and letters sent out of the United Kingdom by private vessels. The penalty for infringing upon the postal monopoly was placed at £5 for every offence or £100 a week if the offence was continued. 9 Ann c. 10, 42 Geo, Roman 3 c. 81, 46 Geo, Roman 3 c. 92, 53 Geo, Roman 3 c. 58, 5 Geo, Roman 4 c. 20. 7 WM, Roman 4 and 1 Vict, c. 33. 7 WM, Roman 4 and 1 Vict, c. 36. During the official postal year from July 1831 to July 1832, there were 133 successful prosecutions for illegally sending and conveying letters. The fines collected amounted to £1,635, the costs paid by defendants to £1,085. The prosecutions were generally for a few letters only, and the great majority of the cases were brought in Manchester. In the case of 41 additional actions, the Postmaster General did not enforce the penalties, cert explanations having been given. Rowland Hill thought that the conveyance of letters by private and unauthorized people was very widespread, and the solicitor of the post office agreed with him. Ac. and P. 1834, Roman 49, 19 pp. 27. Rep. Com. 1837-38, Roman 20 pt. 1 pp. 1723. The reports of the committee appointed to inquire into the condition of the post office and to hear the opinions of officials and the public concerning the introduction of penny postage disclosed an amazing state of affairs. The opinion that evasion of postage was more or less general had been held by the public for some time as well as by a few of the post office officials. But after the evidence upon the question was published, there was no longer any doubt that the views of the public were correct. Some difficulty had been anticipated that men who had violated the law of the land would prefer not to confess their misdeeds before a parliamentary committee. They were accordingly assured that any evidence given would not be used against them, and the names of some were expressed by letters only when the reports were published. Ibid. 1837-38, Roman 20, questions 234, 2883, 4692, 10870-74. Rep 1 App. pp. 427, 431, 433, Rep 2, p. 32. The means by which postage rates were evaded may be conveniently grouped under two main heads, legal and illegal. The most common methods of evading postage in whole or in part by legal means were: by the use of parliamentary and official franks, by enclosing invoices and other communications in goods, by the use of codes and signals expressed by sending particular newspapers, or, when something in the nature of news or reports was to be communicated to many, an advertisement or report was printed in a newspaper, and the newspapers were sent. By means of a letter or package sent to a mercantile house with many letters on one sheet of paper for other people. These were delivered by messengers. Money was sometimes sent in the same way. Rep. Com. 1837-38, Roman 20, QS. 3452, 3754-56, 4330-33, 4152, 6059, 6204, 6971, 8051, 912230, 10481, 5480, 692-95, 4934-45, 5536, 3953. 6174-87. By this means Dr. Dionysius Lardner sent and received the greater part of an extensive literary correspondence, QS. 548796. Ibid. 1837-38, Roman 20, QS. 320607, 336869, 351645, 3872, 4080, 4116-17, 4906, 5434, 6895, 7740, 774250, 724248. Ibid. 1837-38, Roman 20, QS. 3923, 6683, 741923. Ibid. QS. 321213, 392428, 337781, 387982, 4504, 6928, 7867-82, 561318, 4074, 487390, 3520, 7327. Many factors in Ireland had circulars printed, which went free, as newspapers. Their correspondents were distinguished by numbers, and opposite the numbers were printed the communications for each particular person. Ibid. Rep 1, 9, p. 427. The majority of letters which paid no postage or only partial postage were sent illegally, most of them by carriers. A.B. said that in 1836, his mercantile house sent 2068 letters by post and 5861 by other means, principally by carriers, for 1 penny each. C.D. testified that carriers called once or twice a day at his house, and that they received from 100 to 150 letters a week from him. Sometimes the carriers delivered the letters on foot, sometimes they went by coach. E.F.'s letters were carried by newsmen who distributed the local newspaper. G.H., a carrier from Scotland, said that there were 6 others working with him and that they delivered about 700 letters and parcels a day, for which they received 1d or 2d. Each, letters were also illegally conveyed. By free packets, containing the patterns and correspondence of merchants, which the coachmen carried free except for the booking fee of 4d. In warehousemen's bales and parcels. In weavers' bags, especially near Glasgow. These were bags containing work for the weavers, sent by and returned to the manufacturers. By family boxes. Students at college in Glasgow and Edinburgh were accustomed to receive boxes of provisions, etc., from home. The neighbors made use of them to carry letters. By coachmen, guards, travelers, and private individuals. By vans, railways, stagecoaches, steamboats, and every conceivable means. By writing in newspapers, sometimes with invisible ink or by enclosing accounts or letters in them. Ibid. QS 2265-2279. Ibid. 1837-38 Roman 20 QS 2697-2699-2703. Ibid. QS 4229. Ibid. QS 512526. In Walsall, not 150 part of the letters sent to and from neighboring places went by post, QS 56815789. Repcom 1837-38 Roman 20 QS 419596-4205. Ibid. QS 3550-4065-4194-6947. Ibid. QS 525759. Ibid. QS 5265. Ibid. QS 6716 10371. Ibid. QS 6514. Ibid. QS 497 3008 55 25 26, 5329, 5180 688, 5983, 89 62 10 021. App. To Part 2, P34. About half of the letters and parcels sent to the seaports for transmission to foreign parts by private ships did not go through the post office, and this practice was more or less winked at by the authorities. The letters from Liverpool for the United States numbered 122,000 a year, but only 69,000 of these passed through the post office. Ibid. PT. 1 pp. 195.99, 204.30, 346, 351, 431. Ibid. PT. 1 pp. 195.99. Ibid. PT. 1 p. 364. Since the post office has adopted the policy of charging low uniform rates of postage, there has been no concerted attempt to infringe upon its monopoly. The dissatisfied do not now attempt to establish competing posts, nor to evade the payment of the legal rates. Any pressure which may be brought to remedy real or supposed grievances takes the form of an attempt to influence the department itself. It is true that a private messenger service was established for the delivery of letters, but the promoters of that service seem to have been unaware of the fact that they were acting in violation of the law, and a satisfactory agreement with the department was soon concluded. As a matter of fact, it is a question whether succeeding governments have not been too subservient in granting the demands of certain sections of the people, notably in connection with the telegraph and telephone systems and the question of guarantees. The position of a government which has abandoned the principle that any extension of services or change in postal policy shall be based upon present or anticipated financial success must necessarily be a difficult one. Chapter 10. The telegraph system as a branch of the postal department. Previous to the acquisition of the telegraphs by the state, the different telegraphic companies carried on their business in comparative harmony, a harmony which was occasionally disturbed by the entrance into the field of competition of new claimants for the confidence of the public. By far the most important of these companies in 1855 were the Electric and International, and the British and Irish Magnetic, controlling between them about 8,500 miles of line and having 600 stations open to the public. During the succeeding 10 years, by the growth of the old companies and an increase in the number of the new, the number of miles of line increased to 16,000, of telegraph stations to 2040. The number of public messages sent in 1855 was a little more than 1 million, in 1860 nearly 2 millions, and in 1865 over 4 millions and a half. The rates for a message of 20 words varied from 1s, for a distance under 50 miles, plus 1s, for each additional 50 miles, to 4s, for a distance over 150 miles and 5s, to Dublin, including free delivery within half a mile from the telegraph office. In 1860, a competing company, the London District Telegraph Company, started operations in the Metropolitan District and offered a low rate of 6d. A message. In the following year, a far more dangerous rival, the United Kingdom Telegraph Company, announced that henceforth it would charge a uniform shilling rate irrespective of distance. 4 years later, both of these companies fell into line, forced according to some by the unfair tactics of their competitors, according to others by the utter impossibility of making both ends meet, while charging a uniform rate irrespective of distance. The tariff agreed to in 1865 was as follows. AC and P 1867-68 Roman 41 202 pp. 43 73 74. For a distance not exceeding 100 miles 1s, from 100 to 200 miles s. 6d, beyond 200 miles s, between Great Britain and Ireland from 3s to 6s. In some cases, these rates applied only to wires of a single company, and where a message was transmitted over the wires of 2 or more companies, an additional charge was made. Special rates were offered for press messages, the news being supplied by the agency of the Intelligence Department of the telegraph companies. AC and P 1867-68 Roman 41 202 pp. 87-88 126 Repcom 1867-68 Xi 435 pp. 31-68. The earliest proposal for government ownership of the telegraphs seems to have originated with Thomas Allen, the same Allen who was later instrumental in establishing the United Kingdom Telegraph Company. In 1854, he submitted arguments to the government through Sir Rowland Hill in favor of the change. Arguments which met with the approval of Lord Stanley, the President of the Board of Trade, and Mr. Ricardo, formerly chairman of the International Electric Telegraph Company and ex-member for Stoke. 2 years later, Mr. Barnes, an official in the Post Office Department, submitted to my lords a plan for the establishment in connection with the Post Office of a comprehensive scheme of electric telegraphs throughout the kingdom. In 1866, Lord Stanley, as Postmaster General, in a letter to the Lords of the Treasury, called their attention to the fact that the question of the propriety of the assumption by the government of the telegraphic systems of the kingdom had been revived in the previous year by the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce. And still more recently, the proposition had been embodied in a petition from the Association of Chambers of Commerce of the United Kingdom. As he himself had for many years been in favor of such a change, and found his opinion shared by more than one important body of public men, he directed Mr. Scudamore to report whether, in his opinion, the telegraphs could be successfully operated by the Post Office, whether such operation would result in any advantages to the public over the present system by means of private companies, and whether it would entail upon the department any large expenditure beyond the purchase of existing rights. Receiver and Accountant General of the Post Office. Repcom 1867-68 Xi 435 p. 108. AC and P 1867-68 Roman 41 202 p. 7. The report presented by Mr. Scudamore was strongly in favor of the control of the telegraphs by the Post Office, and is especially interesting in furnishing an abstract of the evils which the people considered that the companies were inflicting upon them. The most important of these evils, real or imaginary, were as follows: exorbitant charges and a resulting failure to expand on the part of the system, delay and inaccuracy in the transmission of messages, failure to serve many important towns and communities, inconvenient situation in many places of the telegraph office, it being often at a considerable distance from the business center of the town, especially when in the railway station. Inconveniently short periods that offices are open in many places. Wasteful competition between the companies. The strongest argument against the existing condition was rather a result of competition than private ownership. In the more populous centers, the companies very often had their telegraph offices at a very short distance from each other, being so situated as to compete for the public patronage, while other and more outlying portions of the town were quite unserved. The latter were thus made to suffer in order that favored portions might enjoy the somewhat doubtful boon of competition. In order to show the failure to extend telegraphic facilities, Mr. Scudamore compiled a list of towns in England and Wales having an individual population of 2,000 or more. In his own words, so far as telegraphic accommodation is concerned, while 30% of the whole number of places named are well served, 40% are indifferently served, 12% badly served, and 18%, having an aggregate population of more than 500,000 persons, not served at all. By combining the telegraphic business with the postal service, there seemed every reason to suppose that its advantages could be more widely extended. The hours of attendance increased, charges reduced, and facilities given for the transmission of money orders by telegraph. Mr. Scudamore proposed to open telegraph offices in all places which had a population of 2,000 and upwards, and which already had money order offices. All other post offices were empowered to receive telegrams, which were to be sent by post to the nearest telegraph office for transmission. The charge was to be made uniform at 1s, for 20 words and 6d, for each additional 10 words or part thereof. He judged that the whole of the property and rights of the telegraph companies might be purchased for a sum within £2,400,000, and 100,000 more would have to be spent in the extension of the service. His estimate for gross annual product was £676,000, annual charge £81,250, working expenses £456,000, surplus £138,750. Finally, his reply to Lord Stanley's question was in effect that the telegraph system might be beneficially worked by the post office, that there would be advantages thus obtained over any system of private ownership, and that the post office would have to bear no expense not amply covered by the revenue. In fairness to Mr. Scudamore, it should be remembered that his original low estimate of the probable cost of the telegraph companies did not include Reuters and other important companies. In addition, the strict monopoly conferred in 1869, with the necessary accompaniment of the purchase of all inland telegraph companies, entirely upset his original estimates. Finally, the decision to include the public telegraph business of the railways and the excessive price paid to the railway and telegraph companies should not be forgotten in contrasting the estimated price with that eventually paid for the acquisition of the telegraph systems in the United Kingdom. Mr. Grimston, the chairman of the Electric and International Telegraph Company, contended that the extension of telegraphic facilities to any considerable number of small towns and villages would involve a loss to the state by greatly increasing working expenses, that village postmasters and postmistresses were totally unable to work the telegraphs, and that consolidation could be effected more advantageously by the companies themselves. In another place, his estimate for gross revenue was £608,000, annual charge £105,000 on a purchase price of £3 million with expenses for improvement, working expenses £425,000, and surplus £77,750 AC, and p. 1867-68, Roman 41, 202, pp. 140-547. Ibid, pp. 739. Parl. Deb. 3D Sir, CCXXVI, call 215, CXI call 740-7751. AC and p. 1867-68, Roman 41, 202, p. 131. In 1868, the Postmaster General was given authority by Act of Parliament to purchase the undertakings of the telegraph companies and also the interests of the railways in the conveyance of public messages, together with a perpetual way-leave for telegraphic purposes over the properties of the railway companies. Any telegraph company, with the authority of 2/3 of the votes of its shareholders, was empowered to sell to the Postmaster General all or any portion of its undertaking. When the Postmaster General had acquired the property of any telegraph company, he must also, upon the request of any other company, purchase its undertaking, this privilege being extended also to the railways so far as telegraphs operated by them for transmitting public messages were concerned. The price paid for the Electric and International, the British and Irish Magnetic, and the United Kingdom Telegraph Companies was fixed at 20 years' purchase of their net profits for the year ending 30th June, 1868. In the case of the United Kingdom Telegraph Company, additional sums were to be paid for the Hughes type printing patent, for the estimated aggregate value of its ordinary share capital as determined by its highest quotation on any day between the 1st and 25th days of June, 1868, for compensation for the loss of prospective profits on its ordinary shares, and any sum that might be determined as loss for its attempt to establish a uniform shilling rate. Every officer or clerk of the companies who had been in receipt of a salary for not less than 5 years, or of remuneration amounting to not less than £50 a year for not less than 7 years. If he received no offer from the Postmaster General of an appointment in the telegraphic department of the Post Office, equal in the opinion of an arbitrator to his former position, was entitled to receive an annuity equal to 2/3 of his annual emolument if he had been in service 20 years, such annuity to be diminished by 1/20th for every year less than 20. Those entering the service of the Postmaster General were entitled to count their past continuous years of service with the companies as years in the service of the Crown. For the most part, all the telegraph apparatus belonging to the railway companies and all belonging to the telegraph companies on the railway lines necessary for the private business of the railways were handed over to the railways by the Postmaster General free of charge. He was given the use, from telegraph stations not on the railway lines, of all the wires of the telegraph companies on the lines employed exclusively in the public telegraph business. The railways might affix wires to the posts of the Postmaster General on the line, and in like manner, he might require the railways to affix wires to their own posts for the use of the post office or erect new posts and wires. Finally, the railways were required to act as agents of the Postmaster General, if required, for receiving and transmitting messages. The railways, as a rule, succeeded in driving a very sharp bargain with the government for the purchase of their interests in the public telegraph business. The price paid was 20 years' purchase of the net receipts from public telegrams reckoned for the year ending 30th June, 1868, plus 20 times the increase in net receipts for the 3 preceding years, or for such shorter period as the business of transmitting public telegrams had been undertaken. In addition, compensation was made for the rents, etc., payable to the railways by the telegraph companies for the unexpired period of their respective agreements, for the right-of-way obtained by the Postmaster General over the lands of the railways, for the loss of power on the part of the railways to grant way leaves, for the value of the railways' reversionary interests, if any, in the transmission of public messages on the expiration of the agreements with the telegraph companies, and for any loss the railways might suffer in working their telegraph business as a separate concern. Finally, the Postmaster General was required to convey free of charge to any part of the United Kingdom all messages of the railways relating to their own private business. The Act empowering the Postmaster General to purchase the undertakings of the telegraph companies did not confer upon the Post Office a monopoly in the transmission of telegrams, Mr. Scudamore himself declaring that such a monopoly was neither desirable nor did the Post Office wish it. The Second Act, however, declared that no telegraphic messages, except those sent from or to any place outside of the United Kingdom, should be transmitted by any telegraphic company for gain unless the company was in existence on the 22d of June, 1869, and was not for the time being acquired by the Postmaster General, who should be required to purchase its undertaking upon demand. 31 and 32 Vict, C. 110. 32 and 33 Vict, C. 75. Mr. Scudamore's original estimate of the cost of acquisition of the telegraphs fell far short of the final expenditure, although it must be remembered that, when he proposed £2,500,000 as sufficient, he did not anticipate items of expense which later vastly increased the cost. Before the committee which reported in 1868, he advanced his original estimate to £6 million, and in the following year to £6,750,000, of which he considered about 2/3 to be of the nature of goodwill. The telegraph companies, when first approached, asked for 25 years' purchase of their prospective profits, and the government offered to buy at the highest price realized on the stock exchange up to the 25th of May, with an addition of from 10 to 15% for compulsory sale. The cost of the leading companies, based upon 20 years' purchase of the net profits for the year ending 30th June, 1868, was as follows. For the Electric and International, £2,933,826. For the British and Irish Magnetic, £1,243,536. For Reuters, £726,000. For the United Kingdom Electric, £562,000, and for the Universal Private, £184,421, a total of £5,650,047. Separate bargains followed with many smaller companies. The Acts of 1868 and 1869 granted £8 million for the purpose of purchasing the undertakings of the companies and the interests of the railways. £6,640,000 were spent in purchases, and £1,560,000 in renewals and extensions between 1868 and 1872. The claims for compensation on the part of some of the railways were very excessive. The Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway asked for £1,129,814, with interest, and £1 per wire per mile a year for all wires erected upon its right-of-way by or for the post office. By the terms of the award, they obtained 169, 197, and 1s per mile per wire. The Great Eastern Railway presented a claim for £412,608, with interest, and £1 per mile per wire. Their claim was reduced to £73,315 and an annual payment of £200 for way leave. In all, the capital sum of £10,880,571 was expended by the government, necessitating an annual interest payment of £326,417, charged not on the post office vote, but on the consolidated fund. Rep. Com. 1867-68, Xi 435 p. 162, 1868-69, Roman 6, 348 p. 11, 1867-68, Xi 435 p. 217, 1873, Roman 39, 316 pp. 762-64, 1873, Roman 7, 290 p. 95, Parl. Deb. 3d Sir, CXI Call. 747-751, 130304. According to figures furnished by Mr. Fowler in a speech in the House of Commons in 1868, the value of the capital and the debentures of the Electric and International at that time was £1,240,000, while the capital value of the British and Irish Magnetic was £534,000. Of Reuters Company, £266,000. Of the United Kingdom Electric, £350,000, and of the London and Provincial, £65,000 Parl. Deb. 3d Sir, CXCV Call. 747-751. Rep. PG. 1876 P10, Ibid. 1883 P9. When the post office acquired the telegraphs, a uniform rate was introduced of 1s, for 20 words or part thereof, and 3d, for each additional 5 words or part thereof, exclusive of the names and addresses of sender and receiver, which were transmitted free. Delivery was free within a radius of 1 mile from the terminal telegraphic office, or within the limit of the town postal delivery when it contained a head office and the postal delivery extended more than a mile from it. Beyond the above limits, the charge did not exceed 6d per double mile or part thereof. When special delivery was not required beyond the free delivery, the message was sent free by the next ordinary postal delivery. The newspapers succeeded in having incorporated within the Act a clause prohibiting a higher charge for press messages than 1s. For every 100 words transmitted between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m., or 1s. For every 75 words between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. when sent to a single address, the charge for the transmission of the same telegram to each additional address to be not greater than 2d. On the day of transfer, the post office was able to open about 1,000 postal telegraph offices and 1,900 offices at railway stations, where the railways dealt with the public messages as agents of the Postmaster General. On the 31st of March, 1872, the system comprised more than 5,000 offices, including 1,900 at railway stations, 22,000 miles of line, with an aggregate of 83,000 miles of wire, and more than 6,000 instruments. A decided increase in the number of messages was the result. During the first year after the transfer, there were nearly 10 millions of messages, the second year 12 millions, and the third year 15 millions, or more than double the number transmitted in 1869. The period from 1872 to the adoption of a sixpenny tariff in 1885 was one of steady progress. The number of new offices opened was not numerous, the increase having been only 1,000, but the improvements in existing connections were marked, and the number of messages transmitted had increased to 33 millions. The new tariff rate was 6d, for 12 words or less, with a halfpenny for each additional word, but the old system of free addresses was abolished. Under the old tariff, each figure was charged at a single rate. Under the new schedule, 5 figures were counted as 1 word. A large proportion of telegrams were brought within the minimum sixpenny rate, while the average charge, which had been 1s. 1d, in 1885 was reduced to 8d. In 1886, the number of messages increased from 33 millions in 1884-85 to 50 millions in 1886-87. 4 cables between France and England and 1 between France and the Jersey Isles were purchased by the governments of the 2 countries, 2 by the Belgian and English governments, 2 between Holland and England, and 1 between Germany and England, by the governments of the countries interested. 31 and 32 Vict, C. 110. Following the adoption of a uniform sixpenny rate, the department has granted other facilities to the public, which, though popular enough, have undoubtedly tended to place the working of the telegraphs upon a less secure financial basis. In 1889, the issue of telegraphic money orders was begun as an experiment, and in the same year was extended to all head and branch post offices in the United Kingdom. 2 years later, the post office ceased to require the repayment of the capital outlay on telegraph extensions made under guarantee, and the rural sanitary authorities were empowered to defray the cost of such extensions in places within their districts. For the 6 preceding years, the average annual number of guaranteed telegraph offices was 77, and during the next 5 years, the average annual number increased to 167. As part of the Jubilee concessions in 1897, the guarantors were required to pay only 1/2 of the deficiency, with the result that during the following 2 years, the average annual number of guaranteed telegraphic offices increased to 290. At the same time, the free delivery limit was extended to 3 miles, and a reduction was granted in the porterage charges beyond that distance. Finally, in 1905, the guarantee was reduced to 1/3 of the loss incurred, the delivery charge being fixed at 3d. A mile for the distance beyond the 3-mile limit, instead of the distance from the office of delivery. Rep. PG, 1895 App. pp. 3335, 1889 p. 13. IBID, 1890 p. 7. Rep. PG, 1892 p. 20, 54 and 55 Vict, c. 46. Rep. PG, 1900 p. 15, 1898 p. 19, 1906 pp. 115. In 1896, the main routes from London having become crowded, especially by the telephone trunk lines, the principle of underground lines between the most important centers was sanctioned by the department. London and Birmingham were first connected, and the line was ultimately extended through Stafford to Warrington, where it joined existing underground wires between Manchester, Liverpool, and Chester. By 1905, underground wires were laid as far north as Glasgow through Carlisle, to be extended later to Edinburgh. At Manchester, a junction was effected with a line passing through Bradford to Leeds. During the same year, underground lines were completed from London to Chatham and from London westward toward Bristol, with the intention of extending it into Cornwall in order to secure communication with the Atlantic and Mediterranean cables. IBID 1900 p. 15, 1902 p. 13, 1905 App. p. 99, 1906 p. 16. In 1875, England joined the other important European powers in a telegraphic agreement which went into effect in January of the following year. By this agreement, each of the contracting parties agreed to devote special wires to international service, government telegrams to have precedence in transmission, and to be forwarded in code if desired. Private telegrams could also be sent in code between those countries which allowed them, and the signatory powers agreed to pass them in transit, but each country reserved to itself the privilege of stopping any private telegram. For the purpose of making charges, any country might be divided into not more than 2 zones, and each of the signatory powers owed to the others an account of charges collected. So far as foreign telegrams were concerned, the use of manufactured expressions in place of real words gave rise to considerable trouble in view of the fact that such combinations were difficult to transmit. In 1879, the languages which might be used for code words were reduced by common consent to English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, and Latin. At the same time, the use of proper names as code words was prohibited. This did not remove the evil, as the roots of words in one language with terminations in another were used. An official vocabulary was compiled by the International Telegraph Bureau to become obligatory in 1898, but its publication in 1894 aroused considerable opposition, as many of the words were dangerously alike, and in 1896, the decision of the Paris Conference of 1890, by which the official vocabulary was to become compulsory for European telegrams in 1898, was rescinded. It was also decided that an enlarged vocabulary should be published by the International Bureau, but, owing to the action of the English delegates, the official vocabulary was not made compulsory at the meeting of the International Telegraph Conference in 1903, although artificial words were allowed if pronounceable in accordance with the usages of any one of the 8 languages from which the ordinary code words might be selected. It was also decided to admit letter cipher at the rate of 5 letters to a word, and several countries agreed to lower their charges for the transmission of extra-European telegrams, the English delegates contending that the rates for such telegrams should be made the same as the rates for European telegrams. In 1878, negotiations with the German and Netherlands telegraph administrations resulted in a charge of 4d. A word being fixed as the rate between the United Kingdom and Germany, and 3d. A word between the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. AC and P. 1876, LXX pp. 116-119. Rep. PG. 1904 pp. 1522. In 1885, the following reductions in rates were announced. To Russia from 9d, to 1-2d, a word Spain d, -1/2d, Italy d, -1/2d, India s, 7d, 4s. To be followed 6 years later by still greater reductions. To Austria from 4-1-2d, to d, a word, Hungary 1/2d, d, Italy 1/2d, d, Russia 1/2d, -1/2d, Portugal 1/2d, -1/2d, Sweden d, d, Spain 1/2d, d, Canary Isles 1s, 7-1/2d, 10d. The minimum charge for a telegram being 10d. In all cases. The transmission of foreign money orders by telegraph was inaugurated in 1898 by the opening of an exchange with Germany and its extension shortly afterward to the other important European countries. Rep. PG. 1897 pp. 4042, 1879 p21, 1886 p10, 1892 p19, 1900 p10. In 1892, an attempt was made, curiously suggestive of Marconi's discovery, to transmit telegraph messages without a direct wire. The experiment was conducted between the island of Flatholme in the Bristol Channel and the mainland, a distance of 3 miles. A wire was erected on the mainland parallel with one on the island, and by means of strong vibratory currents sent through the former, signals were transmitted and messages exchanged. 3 years later, and before the practical value of the Flatholme experiment had been substantiated, Mr. Marconi arrived in England to submit his plans to the post office. A private wire from Poldhu to Falmouth was provided for him on the usual rental terms, and it was announced that the post office would act as his agent for collecting messages to be transmitted by wireless telegraphy when he had proved the feasibility of his project. At the International Congress on Wireless Telegraphy, held in Berlin in 1903, it was recommended that shore stations equipped with wireless apparatus should be bound to exchange messages with ships at sea without regard to the system of wireless telegraphy employed by the latter. That the rate of charge for the shore station should be subject to the approval of the state where it was situated, the rate of the ship to the approval of the state whose flag it carried, and that the working of wireless stations should be regulated so as to interfere with other stations as little as possible. In order to enable the government to carry out the decision of the Congress and to place wireless telegraphy under its control for strategic purposes, an act was passed in 1904 making it illegal to install or work wireless telegraphic apparatus in the United Kingdom or on board a British ship in territorial waters without the license of the Postmaster General. The act was to be operative for 2 years only, but before its expiration was extended until the 31st of December, 1909, before which it might again be renewed. Arrangements were also made for the collection and delivery of the telegrams of the Marconi Company by the post offices throughout the country. The company charges its usual rate, 6d a word, and the post office in addition charges the ordinary inland rate. The international agreement providing for compulsory communication between shore stations and ships was signed in 1906 in spite of the protests of the Marconi Company, Sir Edward Sassoon, and others, who contended that the agreement was unfair to the company and a mistake on the part of the kingdom, which was thus giving up advantages obtained by the possession of the best system of wireless telegraphy in the world. The majority of the countries represented were also in favor of compulsory communication between ship and ship, but this was successfully negatived by Great Britain and Japan. In 1908, Mr. Buxton was able to announce in the House that the relations between the Post Office and the Marconi Company are now of the most friendly kind, and that they have accepted and adopted the principle of intercommunication. In the preceding year, 2 experimental stations were started by the government, which will enable the department to extend its operations quite independently of the companies. Rep. PG 1893 pp. 1922-1903 pp. 1518-1905 pp. 1618 4 edwa, Roman 7 C24 6 edwa, Roman 7 C13. Parl. Deb. 4th Sir CLX6 call 840-1858, CXI call 1116, London Times 1906 Nov. 5 P5, 1907 July 1 P14. From a financial point of view, government ownership and control of the telegraphs in the United Kingdom has not been a success. In addition, the Telegraph Department, for some time previous to 1874, had been drawing upon the balance in the possession of the Post Office, a balance which was required to be invested for other purposes and whose expenditure for the use of the telegraphs had not been authorized by Parliament. Mr. Goldsmid, in introducing a motion for the appointment of a committee of inquiry, alluded to this error on the part of the department to the excessive price paid for the telegraphs, and complained that the telegraph system was not being operated on a paying basis. His motion was withdrawn, but an agreement was reached with the department by the appointment of a committee, with Mr. Playfair as chairman, to inquire into the organization and financial system of the Telegraph Department of the Post Office. The committee in their report commented unfavorably upon the unnecessarily large force, the cumbrous organization, and the far from economical management of some of the divisions of the department, advised that an attempt be made to remedy these faults, and that press messages be charged a minimum rate of 1s each, and not at the rate of 1s for each 75 or 100 words obtained by adding together separate messages requiring separate transmission. This suggestion with reference to press messages was adopted, promises were made at the same time to diminish the force, and a scheme was submitted for the reorganization of the department. Parl. Deb. 3D Sir CCXXVI call 172F, Rep. Com. 1876 Roman 13 357 pp. I Roman 13 147 240. The number of telegrams for the year ending 31st March 1887, the year following the sixpenny reduction, was 50,243,639. For the year 1891-92, it had increased to 69,680,5,480. In 1896-97, the number was 79,423,556, and in 1899-1900, the total was 90,415,123. During the next 3 years, there was a reduction, followed in 1902-03 by an increase to 92,471,000. Since 1902-03, the number has again fallen off, the figures for 1906-07 being only 89,493,000. It is rather difficult to make definite statements about the telegraph finances on account of the lack of uniformity in presenting the accounts since 1870. Under gross revenue is now included the value of services done for other departments, but this was not always the rule. The expenditure of other departments for the telegraph service may or may not be included under ordinary telegraphic expenditure. Net revenue may also be increased or a deficit changed to a surplus by deducting the expenditure for sites, buildings, and extensions from ordinary expenditure. Finally, the interest on capital is not charged on the telegraph vote, and so is not included under expenditure. In 1871, 1880, and 1881, there seem to have been surpluses over all expenditure, including interest on capital. Excluding interest from expenditure, the net revenue decreased from £303,457 in 1871 to £59,732 in 1875, when the pensions to officials of the telegraph companies were first charged to the telegraph vote. With an increased net revenue of £245,116 in 1876, following the report of the Committee of Investigation, the department did very well from a financial point of view, until 1884, when the net revenue fell to £51,255, and in 1887 there was a deficit of £84,078, due to the fact that expenses were increasing at a greater rate than receipts. The sixpenny reduction seems to have made but little change in the financial situation, the gross revenue increasing from £1,755,118 in 1884-85 to £1,855,686 in 1886-87. The expenditure for the same years being £1,731,040 and £1,939,734. The net revenue began to recover in 1888-89 and averaged about £150,000 a year during the 4 years ending March 31, 1892. During the fiscal years 1894 and 1895, there were deficits, then a slight recovery from 1896 to 1900, and a succession of deficits from 1901 to 1905. The interest on stock, £214,500 in 1870, increased steadily to £326,417 in 1880, at which figure it remained until 1889, when a reduction in the rate of interest from 3% to 2.34% lowered the amount payable to £299,216. In 1903, there was a further reduction to £278,483. Rep. PG, 1891, App. P40, 1901, App. P57, 1907, App. P61. IBID, 1881, App. P53, 1891, App. P66, 1901, App. P83, 1905, App. P99. The financial loss experienced by the government in operating the telegraphs has naturally produced considerable interest in this phase of the question. Mr. Blackwood, the financial secretary of the Post Office, in his evidence before the committee, considered that the financial control and oversight of the department were inadequate and that the department was overmanned. On the other hand, he was of the opinion that many expenses were met by revenue expenditure which should have been charged to capital. Mr. Baines, the Surveyor General, among other causes of the financial deficiency, called attention to the shorter hours and longer annual leave of the telegraph staff as government employees, the higher standard of efficiency established by the post office, and the prevalence of much overtime work as a result of the maintenance by the companies just before the transfer of an inadequate staff. The fact that the yearly increase in messages continued to diminish after 1879 is commented on by the Postmaster General in 1884 as due to the stagnation of trade, the competition of the telephones, and the rapidity of the letter post. Mr. Raikes called attention to the large number of telegrams on the business of the railways, which were transmitted for nothing. By an agreement with several of the railway companies to send, as a right instead of a privilege, a fixed number of messages containing a fixed number of words, this increase was checked. In 1892, the following comment is found in the Postmaster General's report. This stagnation of business, viewed in connection with an increased cost in working expenses, is a matter for serious consideration, and necessarily directs attention to that part of the business which is conducted at a loss. The reference being to the increased number of press messages transmitted at a nominal charge. When in 1868, the newspaper proprietors succeeded in obtaining the insertion in the Telegraph Act of special rates for the transmission of press messages, no condition was laid down that copies, in order that they might be sent at the very low charges there enumerated, should be transmitted to the same place as the original telegram. The newspapers combined to receive messages from news associations in identical terms, and by dividing the cost, obtained a rate equal on the average to 4-1/2d per 100 words. Under the arrangements adopted for the transmission of news messages, the number of words so sent did not necessitate a corresponding amount of work. But it is an interesting fact that in 1895, the number of words dealt with for the press formed 2/5 of the total number. In that year, the loss on these telegrams was estimated at about £300,000 a year. The high price paid as purchase money is another of the factors to be considered, only in so far, however, as the telegraphic department has failed to meet the interest on the debt so incurred. The telegraph companies were very liberally treated, and in certain cases, excessive prices were undoubtedly paid. Probably the most important reason for the financial failure of the telegraphs, under government ownership and control, has been the influence of forces productive of good in themselves, but quite different from those which had previously been dominant when the telegraphs were under private control and during the early years of government management. The effect of these forces is clearly seen in the reduction of the tariff in 1885, the extension of facilities under inadequate guarantee, and the increase in the pay of the staff. Mr. Buxton is of the opinion that the worst feature of the postal business is the telegraph service. It has never been profitable, and now the telephone system has so largely taken its place that the revenue is falling off. While the Economist considers that it is obvious that both in the savings bank and the telegraph branches reforms are urgently needed in order to place matters on a sound financial basis. Between 1870, when the telegraphs were taken over by the state, and 1873, the number of employees was more than doubled, although, during the same period, the number of messages not including news messages increased only from 10 to 15 millions, Repcom. 1876, Roman 13, 357, pp. 1890, 232, 240. Rep. PG, 1895, pp. 3738. The proportion of the amount spent on salaries and wages which in 1881, before Mr. Fawcett's revision, stood at about 55%, increased, as a result of that revision and Mr. Raikes' revision in 1890, to about 65%. Parle, Deb, 4th Sir, Clicks, Call 389. Economist, Sept. 21, 1907, p. 1576. Chapter 11. The Post Office and the Telephone Companies. The first telephone brought to England by Lord Kelvin in 1876 was a very crude instrument, useful only for experimental purposes and of interest only as a forecast of later development. In the following year, 2 post office officials introduced some machines which had been presented to them by the American inventor Bell, and although not very efficient, they were of some commercial use. The post office made arrangements with the agents of the inventor for the purpose of supplying its private wire renters with these machines if they should wish to make use of them. With the invention of the microphone in 1878 and its application to the telephone, a thoroughly practical method of transmitting speech was at last introduced. In the same year, a company was formed to acquire and work the Bell patents. They endeavored to come to an agreement with the post office by which the latter might obtain telephones at cost price and would in return facilitate the operations of the company, but the negotiations came to nothing. There was then no suggestion of an exchange system, and the company proposed merely to supply telephones and wires to private individuals. In 1879, the Edison Telephone Company of London was established, an announcement having been made in the autumn of 1878 that it was proposed to establish exchanges. An attempt was made to amend the Telegraph Act so as to confer specifically upon the department monopolistic control over telephonic communication, but the amendment failed to receive the sanction of the House of Commons. The Postmaster General then filed information against both companies, on the ground that the transmission of messages by telephone was an infringement of the telegraphic monopoly. In the summer of 1880, the two companies amalgamated as the United Telephone Company, and in December judgment was given by the High Court of Justice in favor of the Post Office. Rep. Com. 1895 Roman 13 350 pp. 16, Law Reports Queen's Bench Division Roman 6 p. 244, Parl. Deb. 3D Sir CCLXXXVI Call 1053. In April of 1881, the Postmaster General granted the United Telephone Company a license to establish and operate a telephone system within a 5-mile radius in London, the central point to be chosen by the company. On the other hand, the company agreed to pay a royalty of 10% of its gross receipts and to accept the judgment of the High Court. Licenses were also granted to establish telephone exchanges in the provincial towns within a radius of 1 or 2 miles, all the licenses to expire in 1911. The Postmaster General reserved the right to establish exchanges for the department and the option of purchasing the works of the licenses in 1890 or at 7-year intervals from 1890, 6 months' notice having first been given. The policy of the United Telephone Company was to confine its own operations to London and to allow patent apparatus to be used in other parts of the country by subsidiary companies, leaving them free to negotiate with the Post Office for provincial licenses. The telephone policy of the Post Office from 1880 to 1884 consisted in the granting of licenses to the companies in restricted areas, so that the telegraph revenue might suffer from competition as little as possible, and the establishment by the Department of Exchanges in certain places not as a rule served by the companies. Owing to the refusal of the government to solicit business, their exchanges did not prove a success. The department itself would probably have preferred to take over the whole telephone business in 1880, but this policy met with no favor from the Lords of the Treasury, who were of the opinion that the state, as regards all functions which are not by their nature exclusively its own, should at most be ready to supplement, not endeavor to supersede private enterprise, and that a rough but not inaccurate test of the legitimacy of its procedure is not to act in anticipation of possible demands. The operation by the government of the unimportant exchanges possessed by them was sanctioned by their lordships, on the understanding that its object is by the establishment of a telephonic system to a limited extent by the Post Office to enable your department to negotiate with the telephone companies in a satisfactory manner for licenses. The London and Globe Company was given a license in 1882 to establish exchanges in London, but they were entirely dependent upon the United Company for instruments, so that there was no real competition. The department proceeded to issue licenses for the establishment of competing systems in places where there were already government exchanges. From 1880 to 1884, the Postmaster General granted 23 licenses, and some 27 towns, with 1141 subscribers, were served by the department. The policy of the Post Office during these years, as thus outlined, was far from satisfactory to the public, due largely to the desire to protect the telegraph revenue and the failure to appreciate the possibilities which the new system of communication was capable of offering. The companies, restricted as they were to local areas, could not offer any means for communication between these areas, since special permission had to be obtained for the erection of trunk lines. The government offered to provide these on condition that a direct payment of £10 a mile per double wire and one-half the revenue over that sum should be paid for their use. But this offer the companies naturally refused to consider. The Lancashire and Cheshire Company proposed to fix their trunk line charges so low as to pay expenses only, but they were informed by the government that they must charge tens, a mile annual rental. In addition, they were not allowed to charge less than 1s. At their call offices, the then prevailing fee for a telegram. A few trunk lines, it is true, were constructed by the government and rented to the companies, but they were quite insufficient to satisfy the demand. In London, the United Telephone Company was not allowed to extend its system beyond the 5-mile radius without special permission and the payment of an increased royalty. In addition, the companies had no way-leave powers, but had to depend upon the goodwill of householders to fly their wires from housetop to housetop, with the result that in London there was a ridiculously large number of exchanges. Finally, the companies were restricted to connecting subscribers with the exchange or their place of business. And, although messages could be telephoned for further transmission by the telegraphs, there was not that close connection between the telephonic and telegraphic systems which might eventually have led to the mutual advantage of each. Moreover, in 1882, the government announced that they would grant no more licenses unless the subsidiary companies agreed to sell to them all the instruments they wished, the intention probably being for the government to supply instruments to companies which would establish exchanges in real competition with the United Telephone Company. Since the subsidiary companies could not supply these instruments without the consent of the parent company, the only result was still further to restrict telephonic development. Rep. PG 1883 P6, 1885 P9, 1886 P10 Repcom, 1898 Roman 12 383 pp. 357 1895 Roman 13 350 pp. 16 Parl. Deb. 3D Sir. CCLXA call 712, CCLXXXVI call 105657 106061, CCLXX6 call 82. In 1884, the prevailing public discontent in connection with the government's treatment of the situation manifested itself in the press and in the House of Commons. The Post Office was accused of practicing a policy of strangulation toward the companies, and the Postmaster General, Mr. Fawcett, acknowledged that there was some truth in the charge. He advised the Treasury that the company's areas of operation should be unlimited, and that their operations should be confined to the transmission of oral communications. The restricted licenses were withdrawn and new, unrestricted licenses granted terminable in 1911 with the same qualifications with reference to royalties and government purchase that were inserted in the old licenses. Nominally, the result produced free competition, but actually competition was impossible until the expiration of the fundamental patents in 1892. The year before their expiration, the companies succeeded in getting control of the situation by an amalgamation of the United Telephone Company with its licenses under the name of the National Telephone Company. Mr. Dickinson, Deputy Chairman of the London County Council, stated that the nominal capital of the United Telephone Company, £900,000, with an actual capital expenditure in 1887 within the Metropolitan District of £228,180, was taken over by the National Telephone Company at a cost of £1,484,375. And the Duke of Marlborough said in the House of Lords that of the £3,250,000 capital of the new company, over £2 million was water. Mr. Raikes, the Postmaster General, who was in favor of competition, wrote to the United Company disapproving of the whole transaction. With the expiration of the patent rights, the new telephone company was resuscitated, with the Duke of Marlborough as chairman, an agreement having been concluded with the Telephone Subscribers Protective Association for a 12 guineas service in London, but it in turn was absorbed by the National Company, much to the disgust of the members of the association. So far as way leave rights were concerned, the position of the companies remained in a very unsatisfactory condition. A committee of the House of Commons advised that certain way leave rights should be granted, but nothing was accomplished. Although a bill was introduced in the House of Commons in 1885 to enable the companies to erect posts without the consent of the road authorities. Rep. Com. 1884-85 Roman 12 p. 63, 1892 Roman 17 278 Ses. 1 pp 3-5, 1895 Roman 13 350 pp. 1692 180 893, 1898 Roman 12 383 p. 12. Parl. Deb. 3d Sir, CCLXXXVI Call. 1052 F. CCCXXXVI, Call 1809 CCCXXXV, Call 1435. CCCXLVI, Call 908. Mr. Forbes, the chairman of the National Telephone Company, said to the committee of 1892, "I am prepared to concede that the telephone company, which conducts about 93 or 94% of the whole telephonic business of the country, conducts a great deal of it monstrously badly. But it is not their fault, it is the fault of Parliament." And again, in referring to the lack of way leave power. Take London, for instance. London is very badly served, but why is it very badly served? Because everything depends upon the caprice of the individual. As a result of the complaints that the telephone system was giving an inadequate service, because of the high rates on an inflated capital, because the utility of the telephones was impaired in that they could not be used in connection with the telegraph and postal services, and because of the lack of powers to erect poles in the streets, or to lay underground wires, or to connect their exchanges by trunk lines, the government announced a change of policy in 1892. This change was set forth in a Treasury Minute of the 23d of May, 1892, and in two memoranda of agreement of the same year, to which the national and the new companies were respectively parties, the arrangements being sanctioned by Parliament in the Telegraph Acts of 1892 and 1896. So far as it affected the National Company, the arrangement was embodied in detail in an agreement dated the 25th of March, 1896. No similar agreement being made with the new company, because that company went into liquidation in 1892, and in 1896 surrendered its license. By the agreement of 1896, the National Telephone Company surrendered its previous license, except for certain definite districts called exchange areas, a large number of which were specified in the agreement. These areas were as a rule coterminous with the urban districts, but comprised in addition certain areas made up of two or more urban districts together with the intervening country. Power was reserved to the Postmaster General to specify other exchange areas, the understanding being, both with regard to areas already specified and those to be specified, that industrial areas of wide extent should be recognized in cases where there were no considerable towns forming centers of business, that neighboring towns intimately connected in their business relations should be placed in the same area, and that small towns and villages should also be so grouped when each by itself would not pay. Outside these areas, the Postmaster General alone was entitled to carry on telephone business, no more licenses being granted for the whole kingdom, and for any particular town only with the approval of the corporation or municipal authority. Call offices for the use of the public were to be opened at the company's exchanges, and connected with the post offices in order that exchange subscribers might telephone over the trunk lines to exchange subscribers in other towns. Where intercommunication took place between the systems of the company and the post office, a terminal charge on the part of the receiving system was allowed. Telephonic messages could be sent to the post offices for transmission as telegrams and delivery as such, or for delivery as letters. Express messengers could also be sent for by telephone, and telegrams received at the post offices might be transmitted by telephone. Only 5 years before, Mr. Raikes, the Postmaster General, said in the House of Commons, "I am inclined to think that it is extremely doubtful whether there would be much public advantage in establishing telephonic communication generally between those towns." Parl. Deb. 3d Sir, CCC6, Call 664. The Postmaster General was authorized to grant to the company all such powers of executing works within its exchange areas, other than works under, over, or along any railway or canal, as were conferred upon him by the Telegraph Acts of 1863, 1878, and Section 2 of the Act of 1892. If required by the company, he must provide underground wires between different exchanges in the same exchange area, and must allow the company to conclude agreements with railway and canal companies over whose property he had exclusive right-of-way. In exchange for these privileges, the company agreed to sell its trunk lines to the Postmaster General, their value being fixed at a later date at £459,114, which amount was paid to the company on the 4th of April, 1895. The length of trunk line taken over being 2651 miles, having 29,000 miles of wire. In order to remove a serious handicap to the success of competing companies, the trunk lines were henceforth to be controlled and extended by the Post Office. The company to receive 5% of any gross charges for trunk line tolls, which it might collect as an agent of the Post Office. The rates charged by the Post Office for trunk line conversations in 1896 were, for distances of 125 miles and under, the same as those previously charged by the company, and were lower than the old rates for distances in excess of 125 miles. Rep. Com. 1892, Roman 17, 278 Ses. 1 pp. 1718, 1895, Roman 13, 350 pp. 834, Rep. PG. 1896 pp. 1617, Rep. Com. 1898, Roman 12, 383 pp. 3537, 40, 1905, Roman 7, 271 pp. 230, 3235, 55 and 56 Vict, C 59, 59 and 60 Vict, C 40, Parl. Deb, 4th Sir, Roman 3, Call, 168, 186, 196. In the meantime, there was evidence of considerable opposition to the practical monopoly of the company within the exchange areas. A motion introduced in the House of Commons by Dr. Cameron, Member of Parliament for Glasgow, in favor of government purchase of the telephones, received considerable support, but was rejected by the government on the ground that the resulting increase in the number of civil servants, not paid at market wages and constantly trying to bring pressure to bear on members, was too serious an evil to receive the sanction of the government. The claim was also made by some of the towns, and by Glasgow in particular, that the municipalities should be allowed to install their own telephone systems in opposition to those of the company. A select committee was appointed to consider this demand on the question of whether the provision made for telephone service in local areas is adequate, and whether it is advisable to grant licenses to local authorities or otherwise. But, owing to the dissolution of Parliament, the committee did not present a report. Considerable evidence was heard, however, and the committee recommended that another committee should be appointed during the next session to consider and report upon the evidence already taken and, if necessary, take more evidence. The witnesses examined were as a rule of the opinion that the telephones should be taken over by the state, but there was a difference of opinion as to whether municipal licenses should be granted. Dissatisfaction with existing conditions seemed to be widespread. The Glasgow Corporation expressed disgust with the service of the company on account of the difficulty of getting into communication with subscribers, frequent interruptions and noises, and the chance of being overheard by a third party, the first complaint being due in their opinion to inadequate exchange accommodations, the second and third to the one-wire system. The corporation was accused, on the other hand, of attempting to dislocate the company's system by refusing them permission to lay underground wires, while the overhead wires were unfavorably affected by the electric tramway currents. The Deputy Town Clerk of Liverpool was in favor of government telephones, but opposed municipal licenses on the ground that they would increase the expense of telephoning between a municipal exchange and one belonging to the company. The London County Council advised that severe restrictions should be laid upon the company by imposing maximum rates, etc., or that the state should take over the company's system, or that the municipality should do so. Questions were sent to subscribers in London by the County Council, by the company and by the Commissioner of Sewers, asking for their opinion on the service rendered by the company there. As may be imagined, the replies sent to the county council and the commissioner were on the whole unfavorable to the company, while those sent to the company were generally favorable to them. It was shown that the number of subscribers in English and Scotch cities was fewer than in most continental cities, and that, comparing the population of the United Kingdom with that of the United States, the number of subscribers in the former should be about 145,000 instead of about 50,000. But nothing was said of the superior postal and telegraphic facilities of the United Kingdom as compared with the majority of foreign countries, facilities which would naturally reduce the demand for a comparatively new and in many cases unpopular method of communication. The rate of the company in the metropolitan area for a business connection was £20 for a yearly agreement, with substantial reductions for second and additional connections, and £12 for private houses. On a 5-year agreement, the rates were £17 and £10 respectively. The rate in Paris at the same time was £16. For the provincial cities in England, such as Manchester, Liverpool, etc., the rate was £10 for a first connection and £8.10. For second and additional connections, and for the large towns, such as Norwich, Chester, Exeter, etc., £8 within half a mile of the exchange, £9 within 3/4 of a mile, £10 within 1 mile, and an additional £2.10. For each additional half mile, with reductions for extra connections. For small outlying and isolated towns, the half-mile rate was £6.10, 1 mile £8 and £2.10 for every additional half-mile. Ibid, 4th Sir Roman 3 Call, 166 F. Rep. Com. 1895 Roman 13 350 pp. Roman 3 2527 6062 87 9091 163 176 221 223 275 280 182 320 122 Parl. Deb. 4th Sir Roman 31 Call, 207 F. Roman 48 Call. 460 366. In 1898, another committee was appointed with Mr. Hanbury as chairman, to inquire and report whether the telephone service was calculated to become of such general benefit as to justify its being undertaken by municipal and other authorities, regard being had to local finance. The committee were of the opinion that the existing telephone system was not of general benefit either in the kingdom at large or in those portions where exchanges existed, that it could hardly be of benefit so long as monopolistic conditions existed, and that it was capable of becoming much more useful if worked solely or mainly with a view to the public interest. They condemned the flat-rate subscription charge of the company as of benefit only to the wealthier commercial classes in English cities. They commented unfavorably upon the fact that in the London area there were only 237 call offices open to non-subscribers, and that as a rule messages could not be sent from them to subscribers, except when the sender and recipient were in the same postal district or town, when the message might be delivered. They were of the opinion that the telephones were far more useful in other countries where the conditions were not so favorable. Conditions, they thought, were unlikely to improve under the present management. The company must pay dividends on an inflated capital. Its license would expire in 1911, and the government was hardly likely to pay the company at that date for goodwill. In addition, there were no restrictions on charges. The company had a motive for limiting its subscribers, as expenses increased proportionately with an increase in their number, and the question of way-leaves was a source of great difficulty. Finally, they declared in favor of competition by the municipalities and the post office as tending to reduce rates, extend the system, and, if the government should eventually purchase the telephones, give alternative systems to choose from. The government adopted the committee's report, and, in a Treasury minute of the 8th of May, 1899, laid down the principles upon which licenses should be granted by the Postmaster General to the municipalities, and announced that in London the Postmaster General would himself establish an exchange system. Rep. Com. 1898 Roman 12 383 pp. Roman 3 Roman 13. In accordance with the finding of the committee and the resulting Treasury minute, an act was passed in 1899, conferring upon the boroughs and borough districts, to which the Postmaster General might grant licenses the right to borrow money upon the security of the rates for the erection and management of telephone systems. A loan of 2,000,000 was authorized for the use of the department itself in establishing telephone competition with the company in London. The Act also defined the relations between the company and the municipalities, or other new licensees, in the event of competition. If the telephone company would agree to abandon the power of discriminating between subscribers and would consent to limit their charges within the maxima and minima prescribed by the Postmaster General, the latter was to extend any way-leave rights already possessed for the period of the license granted to the competing municipality or new licensee. If the new license were extended beyond 1911, the company's license would be likewise extended. But if their license were extended for as much as 8 years beyond 1911, the company were bound, at the request of the licensee and under certain conditions, to grant interchange of communication within the area. The new licenses would be granted only to local authorities or companies approved by them, and the national company was prohibited from opening exchanges in any area in which they had not, before the passing of the Act, established an effective exchange. The effect of the Act was to limit competition to the municipalities, to confine the national company to those towns and areas they were already serving, and to throw upon the Postmaster General the duty of serving other parts of the country. 62 and 63 Vict. C. 38. The form of the licenses for municipalities, among other conditions, contained provisions designed to secure for the public an efficient and cheap service. It was provided that the plant should be constructed in accordance with specifications prepared by the Postmaster General. No preferential treatment should be allowed to any subscriber. The charges made should be within certain specified limits. Neither the license nor any part of the plant of the licensee should be assigned to or amalgamated with the business of any other licensee, and that the license might be terminated if an exchange system were not established within 2 years. The provisions of the Agreement of 1896, which secured cooperation between the Post Office and the National Company, and combined the telephone with the telegraph and postal services, were also introduced into the municipal licenses. The municipalities were bound to give intercommunication between their exchanges, and any established by the Postmaster General, and terminal charges for trunk-wire communications between the exchange subscribers of any other system and those of the local authority were forbidden. About 60 local authorities made inquiries with a view to taking out licenses, but only 13 licenses were accepted. That of Tunbridge Wells was surrendered in 1903, owing to an agreement arrived at between the National Telephone Company and the corporation, the municipal telephones not having proved a success. In the case of 7 others, the licenses were surrendered or cancelled. The following corporations held licenses in 1905: Hull license terminating 31st December, 1911 Glasgow Swansea Brightonth April, Portsmouth. Parle Deb 4th Sir CXV call 780-182, CXV call 841, CXVI call 915-17. In all the above cases except Hull, the National Telephone Company had agreed to forego the granting of special favors to subscribers, had established intercommunication, and their license was accordingly extended in those places to the dates of termination of the corporation licenses. In Glasgow, the National Telephone Company made several applications for permission to lay underground wires, but the corporation refused the concession on any terms. In spite of this advantage and the inability of the company to meet the low unlimited user rate of the corporation, telephones on account of agreements with subscribers in other towns, the corporation found it advisable to sell its plant to the Post Office in 1906 for £305,000 at a capital loss of between £12,000 and £15,000. Brighton followed suit a little later for the sum of £49,000 at a loss of £2,450. Swansea experienced considerable difficulty in borrowing money to extend its system on account of the refusal of the local government board to grant the necessary borrowing powers. The Post Office offered £22,000 for a plant which had cost £27,173. This offer was refused by the corporation, and an agreement was concluded with the National Telephone Company in 1907 for the sale of the plant at a price sufficient to repay the whole capital. Offers were also made to Hull and Portsmouth by the department, but were refused as they were not sufficiently high to cover expenditure. Parl. Deb. 4th Sir LXXA Call 168-186, Cliv. Call 1067-68, Cielziv. Call 87, London Times 1906 July 6 p10, 1907 Jan 3 p8, Feb. 9 p3, Mar 22 p4. As a rule, the local authorities offered an initial flat rate lower than that paid by the company's subscribers in competing centers, but most of the other rates of the corporation authorities were somewhat higher. The service offered by the public telephones was not so satisfactory as had been hoped, and the more numerous connections open to the company's subscribers formed an initial advantage which it was difficult to overcome. On the other hand, the corporations often had the advantage of underground connections, which were denied to the company. But the relatively small number of the subscribers of the corporation telephones, the high cost of underground connections, the clumsy service offered in many cases, and the ability of the company to offer lower rates in competitive areas proved too much for most of the corporations which were granted licenses. Rep. Com. 1905 Roman 7 271 pp. 10, 76, 79, 230 3235. In the meantime, the National Telephone Company had been experiencing considerable difficulty in getting permission to lay underground wires in London. In 1892, the Telegraph Act of that year authorized the Postmaster General to grant to his licenses the same way-leave powers which he enjoyed, subject to the conditions that the licenses should not exercise such powers in London without the consent of the County Council, nor in any urban district outside London without the consent of the urban authority, nor elsewhere without the consent of the County Council. In pursuance of this authority, the Postmaster General, in the agreement of the 25th of March, 1896, undertook, at the request of the company, to authorize them to exercise his way-leave powers in any exchange area. The company did not apply for the exercise of such authority in London, but an attempt was made by them to obtain the consent of the London County Council to allow their wires to be placed underground, and the work proceeded with the permission of the local road authorities in London. Negotiations with the council were fruitless, largely on account of the price asked for way-leave and the demand for lower rates. The Postmaster General was advised that it was his duty to see that the Act of 1892 was enforced, and the resulting correspondence with the company having failed of any satisfactory result, an information in the name of the Attorney General was filed against the company, asking for a declaration that they were not entitled to proceed with their underground works in London without the authority of the Postmaster General and the consent of the County Council. An order to that effect was made on the 24th of July, 1900. This seemed a favorable opportunity for the Postmaster General to secure from the company certain concessions with reference to their London exchange system, as well as privileges for the subscribers of the postal exchanges, which had been established in London, and an agreement with reference to the purchase in 1911 by the Post Office of the company's London exchanges. These concessions and privileges were finally embodied in an agreement made on the 18th of November, 1901, by which the Postmaster General agreed to furnish such underground wires on the demand of the company as he might think reasonable and likely to be useful to the post office later, as well as underground wires connecting the exchanges of the post office with those of the company. When the subscribers of the London postal exchanges exceeded 10,000 in number, the company agreed to pay half of the rent of the latter wires. No terminal charges were payable for a message passing over these wires, or for a message over the trunk lines between the subscribers of the post office in London and those outside London, or between subscribers of the company in London and those outside London. In addition, the Postmaster General promised to afford to the company's subscribers in London all such facilities with reference to postal, telegraphic, and telephonic communications as he granted to Post Office London subscribers, and upon the same terms and conditions. He also agreed to consider all applications from the company for way leaves on railways and canals, where he enjoyed such rights, and the company promised to establish telephone communications without favor or preference. A decision was also reached fixing equal rates for the postal and company's subscribers in London, based primarily on the number of messages sent with an unmeasured rate lower than that previously in force, no revision to be made without 6 months' notice being given. Finally, it was agreed that in 1911 or before, if the company's license should have been previously revoked, the Postmaster General should buy, and the company should sell at its fair market value, all such plant as should then be in use by the company in London and be suitable for the post office at that date. None of the plant was to be considered suitable unless installed with the written consent of the Postmaster General, the question of suitability to be decided by arbitration, if necessary. The local authorities protested in vain against the agreement, their contention being that the Committee of Investigation had advised competition, whereas the government had, on the other hand, succeeded only in making very unsatisfactory terms with the company. AC and P 1902 LV 25 pp. 410, Repcom, 1905 Roman 7 271 pp. 135354 233 235, Parle, Deb 4th Sir LXX Call, 183, CI Call, 10203, CXX Call, 422. Ibid, 4th Sir CI Call, 976 993. In 1905, the Postmaster General and the National Telephone Company concluded an agreement for the purchase of the company's provincial plant, based upon much the same principles which had governed the London Agreement. The question of purchase in the provinces was complicated by the fact that in some towns there were competing municipal telephones, a resulting duplication of plant, and an extension of the license period beyond 1911. By the terms of the agreement, the Postmaster General on the 31st of December, 1911, shall buy and the National Telephone Company shall sell all the plant, land, and buildings of the company brought into use with the sanction of the Postmaster General, and in use on the 31st of December, 1911, for the purpose of the telephonic business of the company. B. Any licensed business of the company in towns where there are municipal exchanges, and where the license extends beyond 1911. C. The private wire business of the company, for which no license is required, in use after the 31st of December, 1911, with buildings, plant, etc. D. All stores and buildings suitable for use in accordance with specifications contained in the agreement. E. All spare plant and works under construction, if suitable for the telephonic business of the post office. The plant, land, and buildings were deemed to be brought into use with the sanction of the Postmaster General if they were in use, or being brought into use at the date of the agreement. In the case of plant to be installed, if constructed in accordance with specifications contained in the agreement, and of land and buildings, if acquired or constructed with the consent of the Postmaster General. With reference to plant not constructed in accordance with the specifications, and plant and buildings of any kind in competitive areas, the Postmaster General reserved the right to object to buy such plant or buildings. The question of suitability in competitive areas to be settled by arbitration. The value to be paid for the company's undertaking, not in the competitive areas and not being private wire business, shall be the value on the date of purchase exclusive of any allowance for past or future profits or any consideration for compulsory sale or any other consideration. The value in competitive areas is to be determined by agreement, regard being had to net profits, and to the circumstances and conditions under which the company would carry on such business after the date of sale. The value of the private wire business, apart from the plant, land, and buildings used therein, is to be 3 years' purchase of the net profits on the average of the 3 years ending 31st of December, 1911. Any other property or assets of the company may be purchased by the Postmaster General, the price to be determined by arbitration, if necessary, and after the date of sale. The telegraphic business of the company will be carried on, whether by the company or the Postmaster General, at the expense and for the benefit of the Postmaster General. In the meantime, the company agreed to maintain its plant in good and efficient working order. not to show favor or preference among its subscribers, to accept minimum and maximum rates, to allow intercommunication without terminal charges between their and the post office subscribers in the same area, and not to collect terminal charges for messages sent over the trunk lines between subscribers of the company and those of the post office. The Postmaster General agreed to extend to subscribers of the company all such telegraphic and postal facilities as his own subscribers enjoyed, and to undertake underground works for the company elsewhere than in London under the same conditions as in London. An agreement was also reached that similar rates should be charged where the Postmaster General and the company maintained competing systems. As a result, measured rates were, as a rule, substituted for the old flat rates, much to the indignation of various chambers of commerce in the kingdom. In the case of complaint as to inefficient service, if the charge is held to be proved before a person appointed by the Board of Trade, and if it is not the result of a refusal to grant way leaves, the Postmaster General may require the company to remedy conditions in the particular area concerned or may call upon them to sell the inefficient system to him. In the first case, if there is no improvement, or if the second alternative has been adopted, the Postmaster General may require immediate sale under the same terms that would have held if it had not taken place until the 31st of December, 1911. Ac. and P. 1905 Roman 44, 16 pp. 323, Rep. Com. 1905 Roman 7 271 pp. Roman 3 Roman 11. The income received by the Post Office for the fiscal year 1906-07 from the London and provincial exchanges and trunkline business was £908,246, working expenses £456,459, balance for depreciation, interest, etc., £451,787, leaving a balance of £19,061 over and above an estimated amount of £432,726 for depreciation and interest at 3% on the capital expenditure. The London Exchange, with a gross income of £330,512, showed a surplus of £25,586 over and above depreciation fund and interest on capital expenditure. The provincial exchanges a deficit of £15,758, and the trunk lines a surplus of £9,333. The number of subscribers to the Post Office provincial exchanges, excluding Glasgow and Brighton, was 10,010. Including the Glasgow subscribers, 11,103, and the Brighton subscribers, 1,542, the total was 22,655. Arrangements were then being made for local intercommunication between subscribers of these exchanges and those of the company in the same places. Hull and Portsmouth were the only towns maintaining municipal telephonic systems in 1907, Hull having 2128 telephones in use and Portsmouth 2553. The number of telephones in the London Post Office telephone service was 41,236, including 425 public call offices. The Agreement of 1905, providing for similar rates in the provinces between exchanges of the Post Office and those of the company, was followed after considerable discussion by the announcement of the adoption of a new scale in May 1906. The rates are now based on the principle of a measured service, under which each subscriber pays according to the quality and quantity of the service desired. He may contract for any number of calls from 400 upward, and he may share a line with another subscriber at a reduced rate, or he may rent a line for his own exclusive use. Rep. PG 1905 App pp. 9092, 1907 pp. 2123-93. Bibliography. This list does not contain a complete record of all the authorities consulted. It merely brings together, with a fuller statement of title, the more important references scattered through the footnotes. Unless it is otherwise stated, London is to be understood as the place of publication for the English books here cited. Printed Records Parliamentary, Documents Reports. Acts of Parliament. Acts of the Parliament of Scotland, 12 vols, 1814-75. Acts of the Privy Council of England. New series ed. J.R. Dasent, 32 vols, 1890-1907. Calendar of Border Papers. Calendar of State Papers America and West Indies. Do, Colonial Do, Domestic, Do, Foreign Do, Ireland. Calendar of Treasury Books. Calendar of Treasury Books and Papers. Calendar of Treasury Papers. Finance Reports, 1797-98. Hansard, The Parliamentary Debates, 422 vols, 1803-91, 41 vols to 1820, New Series, 25 vols to 1830, Third Series, 356 vols to 1891. The work has been continued under other management since 1891 as Parliamentary Debates, 4th and 5th Series. Howell, T.J. A Complete Collection of State Trials, 34 vols, 1816-28. Journals of the House of Commons. Journals of the House of Lords. Letters and Papers, Foreign and Domestic, of the Reign of Henry Roman VIII. The Parliamentary History of England, from the earliest period to the year 1803. 36 vols, 1806-20. Parliamentary Papers. Since 1831, the volumes for each year have been arranged regularly in 4 series, as follows: Bills Public, 2, Reports from Committees, 3, Reports from Commissioners, 4, Accounts and Papers. The volumes are ordinarily quoted, under each year, according to their consecutive numbering, but each series is also numbered separately. Proceedings and Ordinances of the Privy Council of England, ed. Sir Harris Nicholas, 7 vols, 1830-437. Reports of the Postmasters General on the Post Office, beginning with 1850-455. These may be quoted either according to their consecutive numbering or by years. First report equals 1855, 51st report equals 1905, etc. Royal Commission on Historical Manuscripts, Reports. Scobell Henry, a collection of acts and ordinances made in the Parliament held 3 Nov. 1640-17, sept. 1656, 1658. Other books. Blomefield, F. and Parkin see an essay towards a topographical history of the county of Norfolk. 2d ed., 11 vols, 1805-10. Cunningham, W. The Growth of English Industry and Commerce in Modern Times. 3 vols. Cambridge, 1896-1903. DeLawn Thomas, Anglia Metropolis, or The Present State of London, 1681. Dictionary of National Biography. Eaton, D.B. Civil Service in Great Britain, New York, 1880. Froude, J.A. A History of England from the Fall of Wolsey to the Death of Elizabeth, 12 vols, New York, 1870. Gairdner, J., Editor, The Paston Letters, 3 vols, 1872-75. Green, E. Bibliotheca Somersetensis, 3 vols, Taunton, 1902. Joyce, H. The History of the Post Office from its establishment down to 1836, 1893. Knight Charles, London 6 vols, 1841-44. Latimer John, The Annals of Bristol in the XVth Century, Bristol, 1893. Lewins William, Her Majesty's Mails, 2d ed., 1865. London and its Environs Described, 6 vols, 1761. Macaulay, T.B. History of England from the Accession of James Roman II, 4 vols, 1840-956. Macpherson, David, Annals of Commerce, Manufactures, Fisheries, and Navigation, 4 vols, London and Edinburgh, 1805. Maitland William, The History and Survey of London, 2 vols, 1760. Malden, H. E. The Selly Papers. Selections from the correspondence and memoranda of the Selly family, Merchants of the Staple, A.D. 1475-88, 1900. May T. E. Constitutional History of England, 1882. Northouk John, A New History of London, 1773. Ogleby John, Itinerarium Angliae, 1675. Roberts George, The Social History of the Southern Counties of England in Past Centuries, 1856. Rothschild Arthur de, Histoire de la Poste aux Letters, depuis ses origines les plus anciens jusqu'à nos jours, 2d ed., Paris, 1873. Sharp R. R. London and the Kingdom, 3 vols, 1894–95. Stowe, John 1525–1605. A survey of the cities of London and Westminster, improved and enlarged by John Strype. 2 vols, 1720. Thornbury, W. and Walford, E. Old and New London. 6 vols. Periodicals: The Economist, The London Times. Notes and Queries. With reference to the foregoing bibliography, the Letters and Papers of Henry Roman VIII, and the Calendar of State Papers, have formed the basis of this sketch of the British Post Office during the 16th and 17th centuries, with many references to the papers of private individuals and institutions collected by the Royal Commission on Historical Manuscripts. The proceedings and ordinances and the acts of the Privy Council contain important orders issued to the Postmaster General or the postmen during the 16th century, as well as complaints from the postmen and the public. From the beginning of the 18th century, the chief sources of information are the historical summaries appended to the reports of committees and commissioners, compiled during the first half of the 19th century. Of these, the report of 1844 is the most important. The journals of the Lords and Commons throw some light upon the history, purpose, and intent of the various Acts of Parliament dealing with rates and finance. The Financial Report of 1797, various returns submitted to the House of Commons, and the reports contained in the Accounts and Papers for the first part of the 19th century are chiefly concerned with the financial side of the history of the British Post Office. Since 1840, the most important sources of information are the yearly reports of the Postmasters General, dating from 1854, and the voluminous reports of committees appointed to investigate debated points in the organization and policy of the Post Office, as well as to advise upon matters which had produced friction between the department and its employees. Of the secondary works, there is little to be said. The only one from which any important information has been obtained is Joyce's History of the British Post Office to 1836. This book contains a great deal of valuable matter arranged in rather a haphazard fashion and with no references. Writing as a post office official at the end of the 19th century, Joyce hardly appreciated the conditions which his predecessors had to meet. In Stowe's London are found some interesting facts about the London penny post. In Blomfield's Norfolk, early postal conditions in Norwich are described. The other books of the same description contain only incidental references to minor points of post office development. Index: Abuses in the Post Office, 4246, 127, 128. Allen Ralph, 36, 37, 37 note. American Colonies, Post Office in, 32, 33, 59. American Express Company, 70. Annuities, 74. See also Savings Bank Department. Arlington, Lord, 27. Arundel, Earl of 11. Assurance Facilities, 74. See also Savings Bank Department. Bennett, Sir John, 27. Billingsley, 1119. Bishop Henry, 2425. Book Post, 68, 173. See also Halfpenny Post and Rates, Book Post. Bower, Sir George, 80. Bradford Committee, 84-85. British and Inland Magnetic Telegraph Company, 202, 206, 208. Burlamachi, Philip, 1718. Buxton, Sydney, 85, 87, 88. By Letters, 35 note. By Posts, 36, 39, 144. Receipts from 185, 186. Canadian Pacific Railway Company, 134. Carteret, Lord, 42. Cash on Delivery, 70, 71. Chamberlain, A. 83. Chesterfield, Countess of 25. Clerks of the Road, 3850. Coaches, see Mail Coaches and Post Coaches. Coke, Sir John, 11, 12, 15, 16, 18, 111, 112. Competition in Carrying Letters, 190, 1197. Competitive Examinations, 78. Compulsory Prepayment, see Prepayment of Rates. Cott and Frankland, 31, 115. Cromwell, Orders to the Postmasters, 23. Crossposts, 140, 144. See also By Posts. Crosspost letters, 35 Note 36. See also post roads, crossposts. Cunard Steamship Company, 132, 133, 134. Customs duties, 125. Dead letter office, 50. Delivery of letters, 9, 38, 39. Rural, 65, 66. Express or special, 67, 68. Departmental Committee, 82. De Nouveau, 114. De Quaestor, 10, 12, 135. De Taxis, 112, 114. Docra William, 2830. Double letter, 13 Note. Dublin Penny Post, 30 Note 54, 150. Edinburgh Penny Post, 54. Edison Telephone Company, 219. Electric and International Telegraph Company, 202, 205, 206, 208. Embossed stamps, see stamps. Employees, postal, appointment brought under civil service examination, 78, 79. Report of Bradford Committee, 84, 85. Of Departmental Committee, 82. Of Hobhouse Committee, 86, 88. Civil Rights, 82. Postal Unions, 85. Wages, 80, 83. Tweedmouth Settlement, 81, 82. Strike, 81. Grievances, 80, 82, 83. Increase in wages, 81, 82. Evasion of rates, 197,201. See also monopoly, attempts to break. Express delivery, see delivery of letters. Farmers of the Post Office, 21, 22, 36, 37. Fawcett Henry, 74, 75, 80, 81. Fees 915, 45, 49. Fifth Clause Posts, 65. Finances of Post Office, 181.88. Foreign connections. Belgium, 111. France, 111, 113, 114, 115, 117, 118, 120. Germany, 111. Holland, 111, 114. Italy, 111, 115. United States and the Colonies, 120. Note, stages settled on the continent, 112. See also rates and sailing packets. Foreigners Post, 6-7. Franking, 159,172. By members of Parliament, 25. Of newspapers, 48. Franking Department, 57. Frankland, see Cotton and Frankland. Freeling, Sir Francis, 52. Friesel, 11, 1824. Grimston, 205. Halfpenny Post, 68, 69, 197. Hall John, 11. Hamilton Andrew, 33. Hanbury, 82. Hicks James, 19, 20, 24, 26, 27, 112. Hill Sir Rowland, 5961, 187. Hobhouse Committee, 8688. Inman Steamship Company, 132, 133. Insurance Facilities, 74. See also Savings Bank Department. Ireland Post Office in 3157. See also Post Roads, Rates and Sailing Packets, Ireland. Letters, number of 63. London and Globe Telephone Company, 220. London District Post, 71. London District Telegraph Company, 202. London Penny Post, 2830, 34, 35 Note 51, 52. Receipts from 185. See Twopenny Post. Mail Coaches, 40, 41, 55, 104, 105. Manley John, 22, 23. Marconi Company, 213, 214. Mason Sir John, 7, 8. Merchant Adventurers Post, 6, 11. Messengers, 3, 5, 67. Money Order Office, 50, 71. Money Orders, 176, 180, number of 7173. See also rates, money orders. Monopoly, attempts to break, 190, 1197. In carriage of letters and packets, 180, 9191, 195, 196. See also telegraphs, monopoly. Mowat Sir F. 81. National Telephone Company, 222, 24, 229, 231, 233. Neil Thomas, 33. Newspaper Office, 49. Newspapers, chargeable and free, 68. Franking of 48. impress stamps on, 68 number of 68. See also rates newspapers. New Telephone Company, 223. Norfolk, Duke of 82. O'Neill Daniel, 25. Opening and detaining letters, 16, 18, 21, 26, 46, 48, 196. Packet list, 48. Packets see sailing packets. Paget 7. Palmer John, 4042, 44. Parcel post, 70, 174. See also rates parcel post. Patronage, 78, 79. Pattern and sample post, 69. See also rates patterns. Peninsular and Oriental Steamship Company, 132. Penny post, see London penny post. Penny postage, 5962, 158 160. Pensions, sailors, 127. Pitt William, 43. Plague, 26. Political patronage, see patronage. Postal establishment in 17th century, 27 in 18th, 38, 44, in 19th, 57. Postcards, 174 number of 69, 69 note use of 69. See also rates postcards. Post coaches, 40. Post horses, 5, 8 fee for their use, 89, 90, 92 licenses and taxes, 94, 95, 95 note. Monopoly and letting, 92, 94 number to be kept, 92, 93, supply of 89, 90. Postmarks, 29. Postman's Federation, 85 note. Post offices, number of 71. Post roads, 13 cross posts, 103 in 16th century, 97, 101 in 17th century, 99. Maps, 101 remeasured, 103, 104. In north of England, 102, 104. In south, 102 in Ireland, 102, 104. In Scotland, 103. Prepayment of rates, compulsory prepayment inadvisable, 26, 26 note unpopularity of 64. Prydox Edmund, 1821, 136. Rakes, 81. Railways, 107, 108. Amounts paid for conveyance of mails, 56, 78. Authority of Postmaster General over, 77. Principles involved in estimating tollage for conveyance of mails, 77. Randolph Thomas, 7-8. Rates for letters, 13, 23, 62, 64. By weight, 157 redirected, 173. Ships letters, 143, 148, 153. In England, 136, 137, 141, 142, 145, 148, 150, 151, 158. Ireland, 136, 137, 141, 142, 146, 151, 152, 158. Scotland, 136, 139, 140, 143, 145, 148, 150, 151, 158. United Kingdom, 159, 172, 174. To Austria, 135, 149, 150. Belgium, 135, 143, 149, 150, 155. Note, 157, 176. Cape of Good Hope, 153, 154. Channel Isles, 148, 150. Denmark, 137, 143, 149, 150, 155. Note, East Indies, 153, 154. Egypt, 155. Note, 156. France, 135, 137, 143, 149, 149. Note, 150, 155, 155. Note, 176. Germany, 135, 137, 143, 149, 150, 155. Note, 157. Gibraltar, 155. Note. Greece, 155. Note, 156. Holland, 135, 143, 149, 150, 155. Note, 157. Italy 115, 135, 137, 143, 149, 150, 155 note, 156, 176. Malta 155 note, Mauritius, 153, 154 Mexico, 155 note, 157 Norway, 155 note, 157. Portugal 143, 147, 149, 150, 155 note, Russia, 155 note, South America, 155 note, 157. Spain 137, 143, 149, 150, 155 note, 157, 176 Sweden 137, 143, 149, 150, 155 note, 157. Switzerland 155 note, 157. Syria 156. Turkey 137, 149, 150, 155 note, 156 North American colonies, 143, 146, 147, United States, 155 note, 175. In North American colonies, 140, 141, 144, 146 West Indies, 140, 140 note, 143, 146. To the colonies, 159, 175. To foreign countries, 159, 176. Book post, 173 money orders, 71, 72, 176 et sec. Newspapers, 153, 154, 173, 175, 176. Parcel post, 174. Patterns, samples, and writs, 145, 173. Postcards, 174, 176. Registered letters, 50, 64, 173, 174. Returned letter office, 57. Roads, see Post Roads. Royal Mail Steamship Company, 132. Royal Post, 36. Sailing packets, abuses in connection with, 127 et sec. British and foreign vessels, 123. Cost of, 128, 134. Customs difficulties, 125. Number of, 120, 121. Ownership transferred to Admiralty, 129, 130. Steamships, 121, 123, 131. Subsidies for, 130, 131, 134. Use of private ships, 120 note, 123, 124. To Cape of Good Hope, 120. Deal and the Downs, 110. East Indies, 120. France, 111, 115, 116. Gibraltar, 116. Holland, 115, 117. Ireland, 109, 110, 121. Malta, 116. Isle of Man, 110. Mauritius, 120. Mexico, 120. Portugal, 115. Scotland, 109, 110. South America, 120. West Indies, 118 et sec. St. Martin's le Grand, 57. Sample post, see pattern and sample post. Savings Bank Department, 73, 76. Annuity and Assurance Facilities, 74, 77. Criticism by Economist, 75 note. Scotland Post Office in, 31, 32, 34, 59. See also Post Roads, Rates and Sailing Packets, Scotland. Scudamore, 203, 205, 208. Shipping List, 48, 49. Single Letters, 13 note. Smith Llewellyn, 81. Special Delivery, see Delivery. Speed, 14, in 16th century, 98 in 17th century, 98, 99, 100 note in 19th century, 104, 105, 105 note, 106 by use of railways, 107, 108 delays and attempts to remedy them, 100 delays between England and Ireland, 107 means for securing speed, 106. Stamps 65, 68. Stanhope Charles 8, 17, 24. Stanhope Lord John 810, 135. Stanley Lord 8385, 203. Steamships, see Sailing Packets Steamships. Strangers Post, see Foreigners Post. Sunday Posts, 55.79.80. Tankerville, Earl of 4244. Telegraphs cost to government of 205, 206, 208, 209. Finances 216, 218. Government ownership proposed 203 to 5. International agreement 211 to 14. Messages sent 202, 215. Monopoly 207 to 08. Press messages 209, 217. Private companies 202, 203. Railway interests in 206, 207, 209. Rates 202, 203, 209, 210, 213. Relations with Marconi Company 213, 214. Underground lines 211. Telephones, call offices 224, 227. Exchange areas 224. Finances 236. Government 220, 221, 225, 228. Intercommunication 224, 229, 232, 234. Licenses 222, 224. Municipal 226, 228 to 30, 235. Purchase agreement 232 et sec. Rates 227, 230, 232, 234, 235. Trunk lines 221, 225. Underground wires 231, 232, 234. Wayleave powers 221, 223, 224, 232, 235. Threepenny Post 5254. Thurlow 2324. Travelers Post 89. Abuses by postmasters 93. By travelers 91, 91. Note, Trials of Travelers 91. Triple Letters 13. Note. Tuke Sir Brian 47. Tweedmouth Lord 81. Tweedmouth Settlement 81-82. Twopenny Post 5254, 149. Unions, see Employees Postal Unions. United Kingdom Telegraph Company 203, 206, 208. United Telephone Company 220, 222. Universal Private Telegraph Company 208. Wages for 6. Note, arrears in 8, 25, 92, 99. See also Employees. Walpole Spencer 81. Ward 87. Warwick, Earl of 1819. White Star Steamship Company 133. Windibank 1617. Witherings, Thomas 11, 1319, 24, 111, 112, 135, 137, 138. York, Duke of 2530. The Riverside Press printed by H. O. Houghton & Co., Cambridge, Mass. U.S.A. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook of the History of the British Post Office by Joseph Clarence Hemmeon.